Love for the animals.
You've got a dream. You've got to chase it.
One family, countless faces. Meet the primates.
These and other shows from your PBS station are available with Passport on the PBS Video app. Download it today.
You're watching New England Public Media, WGBY Springfield.
Marian Anderson challenged and broadened people's ideas of what the souls of Black folk looked and sounded like.
The Marian Anderson concert turns the Lincoln Monument into the touchstone for civil rights.
She became the face of a movement. That was something she could never step back from.
Celebrate the life of singer Marian Anderson, February 15th on NEPM.
Coming up, stories we're connecting you with tonight. Joe Biden became the 46th president of the United States this week, and we take a look at the man through the eyes of one of his oldest friends.
And I think we will see a president who helps to restore the image of the presidency that we all want.
Honoring the legacy and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
We all have the ability to do something to be in service to others.
And one young lady finds a way to brighten her community during COVID-19.
I think it is very important for people who can to give and donate.
Details on those stories and more up next on Connecting Point.
Support for Connecting Point is provided by our contributing viewers.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for Connecting Point. I'm 𝗍𝗍 𝗏𝗏. Joseph Biden became the 46th president of the United States on Wednesday. The transition of power took place just 2 weeks after a violent siege of the Capitol building by supporters of former President Donald Trump. In his inaugural speech, President Biden declared that democracy had prevailed as he took the helm of a deeply divided nation. Among those closely watching the president's speech was former Springfield Mayor Robert Markel, a longtime friend of Biden's. They first met during their high school years in Delaware, and Connecting Point's Ray Hershel spoke with Markel about this historic moment in our country's history and the friendship that he and Joe Biden have maintained for the past 60 years.
We met when we were freshmen. We were in the same classes together. Joe had this severe stuttering handicap early on in his freshman and sophomore years. Teenage boys can be cruel. He was teased. It was clear he didn't like it. I saw anger on his face sometimes, but he resisted any effort to take a swing at anybody. And in the summer of his sophomore year, he spent the entire summer attempting to overcome the stutter, and he did. His classmates were astonished when we went back for our junior year that the stutter was ended, and we didn't understand it. I do know that he spent practically every day in his bedroom reading out loud, mostly Ralph Waldo Emerson, and learning to pronounce words, learning to speak and enunciate clearly, and he did it. And that was just amazing to all of us. He was also a very outgoing, gregarious fellow. He got to know everybody. He loved to talk to people. He connected with people. And not surprisingly, he became president of our class.
Wondered if you had one typical story, one story you could tell us that sums up Joe Biden going back to his days in high school or his earlier days. Is there one story that kind of tells the story of Joe Biden?
Yes. 7 or 8 of us would hang out at a restaurant in Wilmington on weekends after dances on Saturday night called the Charcoal Pit. As I said earlier, Delaware was a very conservative state. They had mandatory legal segregation in the 2 counties downstate. Newcastle County did not have legal segregation, but there was informal segregation. during senior week, we decided to go to the charcoal pit for lunch. One person we took along with us was the only black student in our class, now a very prominent physician in Philadelphia. He was also the salutatorian of our class. We went and sat in the booth at the charcoal pit, 6 of us. The black student was sitting in the middle, I was on the end. We're sitting there and waiting for service. There wasn't any service. Finally, the manager, whom I knew very well, came up and tapped me on the shoulder. He said, "Bob, come back here. I need to talk to you." I said, "Okay." I walked back. He said, "We can't serve you." And I said, "Well, why?" He said, "We don't serve," and he probably said Negroes during this period. And I said, "What?" I said, "This is a member of our class." I said, "You know, he's with us." I said, "What's the problem?" "I'm sorry, it's the policy of the restaurant. We do not serve Negroes." I walked back and I sat down on the end of that booth, and I know I was flush in the face. I remember this vividly. We were all just sat there embarrassed, not knowing what to do. I had to explain what the policy was. Frank, the black student, was sitting in the middle seat. He jumped up, pushed himself up, and he said, "Let me out. I have a car. I'll just leave." Biden, who sat across from us, said no. And he probably swore a little bit and said, "We're all leaving. If they're not going to serve you, we're not going to stay here." And so we got up and left. And I think that shows the instincts that the guy has. He has an instinct for fairness, reasonableness, and certainly the kind of thoughts for his friends that I think will serve him well as president.
Bob, you had sent us some pictures showing that you each were members of each other's wedding party, for example. So that friendship really was a close one. At the time when he was in high school, did you feel that he had the political leadership, the ability to lead politically, that someday perhaps his career in politics would be a successful one? And did you ever dream that he could be president one day?
Clearly, he had the ability to connect with people, to make friends, and to get himself elected. In 1970, he ran for the Newcastle County Council and won. And as it turned out, he was the highest elected Democrat in the state of Delaware, which was and even continues to be a very conservative, Republican-oriented state. And so being the highest elected Democrat, they came to him and said, "We need a candidate for the Senate." And so he ran, and again, in a very close election, he won by a razor-thin margin against Senator Boggs. Whatever Joe Biden accomplishes in terms of policy, foreign policy, domestic policy, one thing I think we can be sure of, he will restore dignity, respect, and civility to the office of president. And I think that's something that all Americans, even those who supported Donald Trump to the end, would tell you, "Yeah, I like his policies, but I don't like the midnight tweets and the attacks, the personal attacks against others and so forth." Biden is not that way. And I think we will see a president who helps to restore the image of the presidency that we all want, and who will make a very strong effort, as he said in his inaugural address, to bring us together. That's a tall order, very tall order. There's a very deep divide. I think it's reasonable to doubt that that divide can be closed. But I think we have a president now in office who's going to make a strong effort to do it.
Connecting Point has exclusive coverage of this week's inauguration online. Congressman Richard Neal attended President Biden's swearing in and shared his thoughts with Ray Hershel on the transfer of power in an online exclusive.
25,000 troops surrounded the Capitol, 6 blocks out, east, west, north, and south. And they ensured that the transition of power that we all expect took place precisely at noontime, when the Constitution says that the new president should take his new job. And I thought that greeting them, saying hello to them, and thanking them was an important part of our responsibility.
And New England Public Media photojournalist 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 was in Washington for the inauguration of President Biden, and you can see the images and stories that he captured in our digital exclusive series, Divided: Scenes from Inauguration 2021.
I don't think that anybody at the time thought, oh, these Black Lives Matter protests are sort of a threat to like our way of life or a threat to the nation. Whereas certainly with the Capitol invasion, the Capitol riot, people felt like these are folks who are trying, even in a bumbling way, to stop the process of government, to overthrow the government.
Both are available online right now at nepm.org/connectingpoint. On Monday, as a nation, we celebrated the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But on one of the last days of 2020, the Martin Luther King Jr. Presbyterian Church in Springfield was set ablaze. Since then, a suspect has been arrested for allegedly starting the fire, but now the church needs to be rebuilt. Connecting Point's Ross Lipman met with members of the church and its pastor to discuss what the MLK Church has meant to the community over the last 40 years and how they continue to honor the legacy of Dr. King as they face this new challenge.
And you all can turn facing me this way, please.
Next to the boarded up windows of a place they once gathered to pray.
And if you could spread out, that would be good because it's still COVID.
Reverend Dr. Terrlyn Curry Avery is meeting with a handful of congregants.
Ring with the harmony.
It's the first time they've been together in the new year. And over the last 40 years, the Martin Luther King Presbyterian Church has been a fixture in Springfield's Mason Square neighborhood. As 2020 drew to an end, residents woke to see that the church was burning.
My initial feelings was, what? The church is on fire? It was a little surreal.
An arrest has been made in connection to the fire. Now,
so I'd like to just read this piece to you.
Dr. Curry Avery turns toward healing and rebuilding.
Think about, where do we want to go as a church? Who do we want to serve? Because we have work to do even while this church is being rebuilt.
But rather than citing scripture, she chooses to read the words of the church's namesake from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, "Where do we go from here?"
Let us be dissatisfied until that day when nobody will shout white power, when nobody will shout black power, but everybody will talk about God's power and human power. And I know that y'all ought to be saying amen because it's still the same today.
When do you think you really were able to process the fact that this had happened here?
I think I'm still processing it, if I'm being honest, because there are times when I get, it's been go, go, go. But when I had that moment to kind of sit and say, okay, there's no church building there anymore. And so now there's a lot of work ahead of us.
Is this going to have to be a total rebuild?
Well, it will be a total rebuild. The damage itself in the inside has been estimated at $100,000 worth of damage.
I mean, look around at how many people showed up here today from phone calls and text messages yesterday.
The members of the church weathering the cold to gather also bring pictures from some of their favorite memories at the church, like James Watts.
The one that's framed there.
Yeah,
Can you show me the framed photo?
This one here is probably from the early 90s. This is probably an Easter celebration. This is me and my stepdaughter. It is always a heartfelt thing is when you came to MLK, you felt like family.
In the months before the fire, the church remained empty, the pandemic forcing services to be held online.
2020 was a year where we as a nation confronted racial injustice in a way that we hadn't since Dr. King had been alive. Mm-hmm. And for you, on one of the very last days of 2020, for this church to be burned, what did that mean to you and what did that mean to the congregants here?
Sadly, I can't say that a church burning, a black church burning, is a surprise. Because historically, That's what's happened in this country when people want to terrorize people of color or really want to say, I don't like you or you're worthless, or really to take your spirit, because that's what this is about when it's a church.
But if this brief gathering in the parking lot is any indication, their spirit has not been broken.
People have asked me, do you think MLK will survive? And I had to tell them, we've never really gone anywhere. We've been on media as far as the Zoom and everything like that. But MLK is always going to be a beacon of light somewhere in this community.
This church being in his name, we are about what Dr. King was about. So we want to be out here to love and support our community, and that will continue.
"2020 was a tumultuous year which brought a national reckoning on racial justice in the wake of the deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and others. I spoke with Ron Johnson of Martin Luther King Jr. Family Services in Springfield about how the legacy of Dr. King's life and work has impacted the events of the past year. I began by asking him his reaction to the recent arson at the Martin Luther King Jr. Presbyterian Church in Springfield.
Well, when I got that call at 5:30 in the morning that there was a fire on the campus here, I was perplexed and very afraid for what it could be, whether it was arson or whether there was perhaps a homeless person that was maybe sleeping in the building and trying to stay warm. Just didn't know. And once arrived here, I was clearly aware that it was a really bad fire, and the fire officials did indicate that it was possible arson, but it really traumatized the community. It traumatized all the staff, and certainly the members of the church were traumatized to have their place of worship to be decimated, and to know that it was intentionally set really just added heartache to injury.
And unfortunately, this isn't the first time that this has happened. Back in 2008, the Macedonia Church of God in Christ in Springfield was also burned down to the ground after the election of Barack Obama. Did this latest act sort of reopen old wounds in the community?
It absolutely did, because we understood that we were traumatized by that event and the circumstances under which it happened, to know that that was intentionally set. And it did bring back the frame of reference that we all had as a community for the hatred that exists in the hearts of certain people as it relates to places of worship where they know there's a gathering of Black folks.
Now, 2020 was an extremely turbulent year. 2021 has started off also a little bit rocky. What would Dr. King say about this past year?
Justice delayed is justice denied. He would encourage us to all consider finding ways that we can get connected to make a difference in our communities. He said that we all have the ability to do something to be in service to others. So he'd be talking about reconciliation. He'd be talking about developing strategies and plans for being able to address the injustices that still exist. And he'd be concerned about the hearts of individuals who have hatred in their heart, that he'd be praying for them and encouraging others to create a better understanding of those individuals and the circumstances that might cause them to have developed such a hard spirit and want to do harm to an edifice or to the lives of any individual or a group of people.
Now, in the wake of this national discourse on racial justice and injustice, there has been many demonstrations and protests happening across the nation. But can you talk to us about what the impact has been here locally?
Well, we know that we saw a lot of people organizing, and it was really great to see the young people, to see a new generation of folks coming to life and voicing their opinion, coming together with unity with other members of our community and folks from beyond our community to say that we've had enough America. We are done with all of the unjust activities that have taken place over these hundreds of years, and we're not going to stand for it. So to see Black Lives Matter painted on the walkway of City Hall and Symphony Hall, a major thoroughfare here in the city of Springfield, But to have that message come out from the city, I think was very helpful. We saw the advent of a mural here at the MLK Family Services that gave tribute to all the individuals whose lives were snuffed out at the hands of law enforcement officials. And the list continues to grow even today, which is very sad. Lets us know we have a lot more work to be done, but that the young voices that are rising up are really calling attention for America to make a change.
You mentioned all of the inspirational things that we have seen from this national discourse on racial justice. Besides the protests, what more can be done? What work has to be done to continue making an impact?
Well, we have to look at our legislators. We need to look at our political leaders to examine the policies that create an unjust situation to occur in an organization, in a community, in a corporation, wherever it is that there are policies that aren't in step with where America wants to be at or sees itself as being, needs to be addressed. So I say policy change, allocation of resources, and the mandates that can be delivered also out from whether it be a lawmaker or whether it be a private corporation changing its policies about who they're going to spend their money with, who they're going to endorse as political candidates, what organizations they will disavow their association with.
We celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. holiday one day a year, but what should we be mindful for the rest of the 364 days?
We haven't arrived yet. There's still a lot more work to be done, and we need to find ways that work at the lowest of levels. So at the macro level, we know it's the leadership condemning acts such as arson, such as hatred, such as police violence in our community. That's very important to make sure that there's a zero tolerance for any of that we look to our leaders for. But then in terms of what individuals can do, I suggested recently that in our community here, we have opportunities within our school system for folks to volunteer. Take an hour out once a month to go and read to children. Watch a documentary on the life and times of Dr. Martin Luther King. Have a discussion over dinner about racial injustice and your family values as it relates to having a zero tolerance for that and accepting that all people are created equal. It is the social environments and the policies that sometimes cause us to be disenfranchised and then looked down upon by society.
There is no question that the coronavirus pandemic has brought with it dark times for many and emotional and financial distress across the globe. But one young lady from Amherst has found a way during COVID-19 to brighten her corner of the world, and she does so with flowers. Producer Dave Frazier shares her story.
I think it is very important for people who can to give and donate to people who need things.
Last year, while homebound by the pandemic, 11-year-old Quynh Ly of Amherst began making paper flowers. It was one of the many coping mechanisms that she and her family did to help pass the time during the days of isolation.
We all cope in different ways, right? I did jigsaw puzzles because this was early days, right? We were trying to occupy time, and having busy hands sometimes helps with that. And when I ran out of jigsaw puzzles, she started teaching me how to make these flowers, and I took to it immediately and just obsessively started making them.
Old piano music that we don't use anymore.
Using paper that would normally have found its way into the recycle bin, Quynh and her dad started making flowers for family and friends. Soon they found they had more flowers than they knew what to do with. So many, in fact, that they decided to start selling them and donate the money to charity.
We were able to talk about what can we do that's productive with these, because what are we going to do with hundreds of flowers, right? So and we knew that when we gave them to people, we had given them to people in the past, they loved them. So we used the time to really talk about how to support some local causes, and that's what we came up with.
We picked A Better Chance Amherst and the Amherst Survival Center because they're local and they support two big causes that have happened, which is racism and hunger. And so they just support those causes, and we do too. So we are like, let's donate all the money from the flowers we sell to those two charities.
They started a website called Quinn's Funky Flowers and managed to make over 1,000 flowers. That's 5,000 petals folded, according to Quinn's dad. In the end, the two raised over $2,000 for the charities they were supporting.
As Quinn's unpaid intern, right, we're trying to figure this all out. We had to learn website development, right? So how to create a website that people could navigate, how to develop a form. And again, because of social distancing, people are like, can I just Venmo you? So I learned how to do electronic transfers, which is good.
With the current news cycle, it can be difficult to stay positive, but there are still many good things happening amidst the chaos. So thank you, Quynh Ly, for showing us that from your corner of the world.
I was very surprised that a lot of people wanted to buy flowers and help support these charities, and it was a good surprise because it makes them feel better in life in general. I think that it was really a fun project and that I would do it again.
That does it for Connecting Point for January 22nd, 2021. Remember, you can always find the stories that you watch this evening, as well as exclusive features and digital-only content like our photojournalism project, Divided, Scenes from Inauguration 2021. Online anytime at nepm.org/connectingpoint. And please join us again next Friday night at 6 right here on New England Public Media for more stories of the people, places, and ideas that matter most to Western New England. I'm 𝗍𝗍𝗄𝗏. Be safe and have a good night.
Support for Connecting Point is provided by our contributing viewers.
This is our story.
The Black church has sustained the African American people from the days of slavery to this day.
I don't know how we could have survived as a people without it.
The role of music in the Black church is everything.
We had to have some individuals